welcome to Bugblade. So one of the most frequently asked questions that I get about Modern is, well, what's the sideboard for your Bugblade deck? So I figured I'll just show you guys the list. I'm sure some of you want to play this at your local FNM conveniently. It's already Friday night, so maybe you'll be taking this Bugblade deck, I don't know. Either way, man, my voice didn't know my voice could go that high. Anyway, so people often ask about the swords, and I figured I'd explain that in this video and a couple other decisions. So, like, this kind of deck is sort of positioned well to take on, like, the Death Shadow decks, I guess you could say. I mean, it's got a lot of Fatal Push. It's the main reason why I have two swords that have protection from black, you know, Light and Shadow, and Feast and Famine are very good in the Death Shadow matchups. Also, Sword of Fire and Ice is kind of the best sword, so it's difficult to not run it. It's also very strong. A Batterskull, kind of a nice late game threat. Make a lot of land drops. There's a Bitter Blossom in here because sometimes it's a little thin on the creatures, so it's nice to have a different way. Garruk actually used to be in the main of the deck. If you're wondering why there's Garruk in the sideboard and a Thrun in the main versus the other way around, that Garruk didn't test too well, and that Thrun actually tested much stronger, especially with the Fatal Push meta. Now, I will say, this deck has a couple weaknesses. It has weaknesses in the sense that, A, it can't really deal with the card like Tasigur, and Tasigur is fairly popular in Modern. So, like, basically, you kind of have to, like, Jace and then Lily it, or the Pro Black. The Pro Black is very important because, well, one, this is one of the bigger cards that's going to cause you issues going forward in the format, and even the format right now. You know, there's a lot of Fatal Push, there's a lot of Death Shadow, there's a lot of Abrupt Decay, there's a lot of black creatures in general. But definitely one of the weaknesses of the deck is Tasigur or like Gurmag Angler, and for those you really need your swords. It's kind of where the Pro Black comes in once again, as I said before. And the Trophy Mages get the swords. The Jace, for instance, Prodigies, you could run for Snap. I think the Jace are actually a little bit better, and they help deal with cards like Tasigur. Like, I mean, it's a little bit of a ridiculous dream to assume that you can get Lily and Jace in play at the same time. Also, in some matchups, you know, the card draw is a little bit nice, maybe like a late-game Ancestral kind of thing. And you also have Academy Ruins in here, so it synergizes with Jace. You could discard like EE, put it back on your deck. But once again, we're looking at some pipe dreams. But everything else is pretty normal, you know, 3 Thoughtseize, 3 Inquisition, 2 Decay. I'm running Scavenging Ooze instead of Tarmogoyf because I believe that you could take over a game easier with a card like Scavenging Ooze, and that Tarmogoyf is so easily removed that if you were to resolve Tarmogoyf or Scavenging Ooze, that Scavenging Ooze would just be stronger before it gets removed, sort of thing. And I also think that it's a good idea to attack graveyards, and there's no other card in the main that can do that. And that's kind of like a... because I like Goyf. I think the Goyf is not the greatest right now. I think it's definitely still, you know, one of the stronger cards in Modern, but I think Scooz is actually much better in this deck. Also, the life gain plays a factor because the deck is kind of slow, and you might run into a situation where, like, oh, I played Thoughtseize a couple times, I've shocked, you know. So you could easily run into some problems. And I'm only running 3 Seer Visions because I don't like that card. I don't think it's very good. The deck's been performing pretty well. Let's see, what else is there to explain? Well, I put one of each basic. There's a Treetop Village. It has Trample, so you can get through with the sword. I mentioned the Academy previously. There's a Creeping Tarpon as well, because manlands are just good in Modern. And here's the sideboard. Guess I should probably explain that one to you. It's not too complicated. Tried to keep it nice and simple, so like Spreading Seas, Fulminator Mage. You know, those are for like Tron, and then there's other matchups for Spreading Seas as well. If you feel as though your opponent's running a lot of basics and you can't Fulminator them, well, then you got your Spreading Seas. Vice versa, you feel like your opponent's got a lot of non-basics, maybe you'd rather just have the Fulminator Mage because it recurs with your Liliana Last Hope. That works as well. Surgical, because graveyards are great. Nile Spellbomb, because it's not only good against the graveyard decks, but it's also good against things like Death Shadow and Grixis decks, kind of like the decks where you can board it in matchups where you need to deny the graveyard or want to deny your opponent's resources, or it also works against combo decks as well. Counter Squall, it's just nice to have counter magic for like Tron matchups and decks like Burn, because Burn is not the best matchup for this deck. You kind of need ways to just counter spells that are not instants or sorceries, or excuse me, that are instants and sorceries, and like Go for the Throat kind of answers the initial issue of like the big creature problem. Maelstrom Pulse is much of the same. It also answers Planeswalkers, because big Planeswalkers are kind of a problem. And then Damnation, just for like the Eldrazi. Eldrazi's pretty popular. You'll definitely board in like your Pulse and your Go for the Throne in that matchup. Or at least I've been doing that, you know. Maybe the Pulse is a little bit sketchy, but I still board it in. And then Jace is a lot for like affinity, small creature decks. It's great in like grindy mirrors because its -2 is very strong. And then Garruk is sort of for these mid-range non-bolt decks. things where, well, Garrett can't die to Bolt, essentially. You want to sort of eat the smaller creatures, or like decks like Jund. I might even board in the Garruk for Jund. I definitely boarded in for decks like Abzan kind of thing. And Creeping Corrosion, it's for Affinity and Lantern. Both of them. And Hurkyl's is more for Affinity, and this is much more for Affinity and Lantern. Because like once they get the lock, being able to get a Creeping Corrosion, you can snap it back kind of thing, because there's a high probability, excuse me, of it going to your graveyard, of it getting, you know, they're milling your whole deck anyway, so given that's the win con, you have a lot of ways to recur it, or you can just keep it in your opening hand, hopefully it doesn't get Thoughtseized, and then wipe the board kind of thing. These sound like stretches, I know, but listen, Lantern is a rough matchup sometimes. But this is mostly for the BGX decks. This is kind of like the BGX killer, because I figured everyone and their mom is going to be playing Death Shadow and Fatal Push, so why not play a deck that has no Death Shadow, has Fatal Push, and still is well positioned? But anyway, that is going to be it for this episode. I hope everyone enjoys playing this bug deck, and I will see you guys for the stream on Mondays. Come check it out on Twitch.